as I shared when we began our time together, this worship service, this past week, 5 years ago, we lost our daughter Lucy in a tragic car accident. And as Leann and I were thinking about this week, we realized we don't know that we've ever shared the details of what exactly happened, and most of you have been kind enough not to ask. And so we just thought to begin our time together, it might make sense just to explain to you exactly what happened. And so we were actually in the process of selling our home. We were planning to move from our home in Golden Springs and relocate to a different area of the city. And so our house was actually for sale that evening. And so we had done like we did many nights of the week, and we went to Choccolocca Park. At Choccolocca Park, we have incredibly fond memories. We would go and run. Ashley and Lucy would ride their bicycle. And so we did that for, I guess, a couple of hours. Something like that. And so it was time for us to leave. And so we got in the car and we left like we did so many times before. And we were driving towards the Oxford Exchange. And the last thing that I remember is two black stripes coming towards us. I would later figure out that was two black stripes on a Ford Mustang coming at us so quickly and so fast that I had no time to respond. And so
the last thing I remember was we were deciding where we were going to get ice cream.
Yeah, where we were going to get ice cream.
Because they were still at our house, and I don't think we ever decided.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. And so immediately upon impact, both cars exploded. And I suppose that Leann and I were knocked unconscious. And so we woke up I woke up to flames shooting out from the front of the car, and managed to wake Leann up and told her, we've got to get the kids out of the car, we've got to get the kids out of the car. And so
I remember doing that. I remember I was on Ashley's side, and I remember getting Ashley out, but after that point, after we got out of the car, I go blank for, I would guess, at least 30 minutes. I don't remember really what happened. I know that we've been told there were other people at the scene that helped us get further from the car, but I don't remember any of that.
Yeah. And I got Lucy out of the car. That's important. That's an important part of my journey and my story, and we'll pick up this a little bit later, but that would be the last time I ever got to hold Lucy, was when I pulled her out of the car, for reasons that we'll talk about later. And so we got away from the car as quickly as we could, got to the side of the road, and I don't know how I managed this, but I somehow remembered my mother-in-law's cell phone number. It just kind of came to me, called her, and said, hey, can I talk to Brad? Because I didn't want to share with her what had happened. I wanted to share it with Brad first. So let them know what had happened. The kids, Ashley was in such a state that he was airlifted to Children's Hospital. They wanted to airlift Lucy to Children's Hospital, but Lucy, they couldn't stabilize her enough. So they took Lucy to RMC, and then they took us to RMC as well.
Right, by ambulance.
By ambulance, yeah.
In the same ambulance.
Yeah, we were in the same ambulance. It's interesting. Tangential. But I mean, what kind of brings up for us, and then I'll let Leann share a little bit about kind of what she was feeling. But like, you know, our scripture today comes from the book of Jeremiah, or at least for this lesson it does. And I think we tend to think about this grandiose plan that God has, right? You know, for I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. And I'm not so certain that that's exactly how God views the world. And I don't know that you are either. I mean, you want to talk about that?
We think God has a plan, but I don't necessarily think that God has a plan for every tiny incident that happens in our lives. I think that that God's plan for us is to be happy and to be loved and to love others as He would love them. And I think I am thankful for very early in Kyle's ministry, we pastored a church in Cherokee County, Cedar Hill. Della is over here today. It was a special little church. And early in the ministry, I remember being at the parsonage and Kyle leading a Bible study by Adam Hamilton called When Good Things Happen to, no.
So the Bible study was when Christians get it wrong.
When Christians get it wrong. And the particular lesson was when bad things happen to good people. And if you know me, you know I do not remember anything. So the fact that I have held on to this for over 10 years, I feel like it was preparing me for maybe this journey that we would later live. But I remember in that Bible study, and I could tell you where I was sitting. I mean, it was so impactful that this particular lesson, I don't remember any other lesson from the Bible study, but I remember sitting there and I remember us talking about how God isn't a puppet master in the sky, and He's not just deeming all of these little things to happen. And I remember that just clicking for me. And I especially remember it clicking because I go down the rabbit hole and I start thinking, well, if God planned this for my life, then God also planned what happened to the man that hit us and the life that he lived, and that would all have been part of God's plan. And so I am so thankful for this foundation that I had in my faith, because I feel like it carried me through this tragedy, because I was never mad at God, because my faith, I didn't believe this was part of God's plan. I knew it was not part of God's plan. And back to the accident, that night on the side of the road, I instantly remember there being a million people there, all of the firefighters and EMTs and just people and lights, and it just being very crowded. And when we're on the side of the road, there's guardrails on either side. And for a while, I don't know how long, but Lucy is there with us. And I remember them trying to revive her and detect life in her. And I remember them taking her away and moving her to the other side of the road. And that was to protect us, I'm sure. But in that, I have a vision of God over Lucy, and He's crying. And in that, I knew God was sad. God was sad with me. God didn't cause this to happen. He was equally as sad. And so I feel like that carried me through it all, because I knew this is not what God wanted. God was sad too.
Yeah, and it was so important for us because, I mean, if your theological foundation is that God is causing everything to happen in the world, and God is this great puppet master, and He causes this to happen and that to happen, and well, the logic takes you awful places, like you said, like God willed that a 3-year-old little girl get killed in a car crash.
So
God,
that we could do this today?
But if we hadn't had that foundation, if we had not done the hard work, I think, of thinking intentionally about what we believe about God, I know we wouldn't be sitting here, because I know where that would have probably taken us. I mean,
we chose this title for this particular lesson because sometimes in grief, people say things that can be hurt. They're meant to be helpful, but they can be very hurtful. And luckily, it didn't happen too often, but a couple of times someone would come up to us and say, it's just part of God's plan. And an anger would rise in me, because I knew that is not
Yeah.
God did not do this to me. I knew that, and I knew that deep in my bones and deep in my soul that this was not what God wanted for us and for the life of Lucy and our lives.
And so I think our invitation for this lesson is just for you to reflect on, during the next song. What do you think about God? Because I'm telling you, it matters. It really, really matters when it comes to the thick of things and the rubber meets the road. The way that you think about God is going to inform the way that you deal with adversity of any shape, form, or fashion. And so it's super important. And maybe for you, it is, I think God has this plan. And if that brings you comfort, I encourage you to hold on to that. Because we all make meaning out of our circumstances differently. We all make meaning out of what happens to us. We all ascribe some sort of meaning to it because it helps us get through. For us, that was not a helpful way. But during this time and during this next song, think about that. Think about how what you understand about God would inform the way that you would deal with adversity in your life. I remember when I was in seminary and I was in Old Testament, I wasn't expecting my Old Testament class to be quite as interesting as it was, right? Because it's the Old Testament, and most people don't assume that it's going to be that interesting. But oh my goodness, did I get resources that I would never imagine that I would use in my life and in my spiritual journey. And one of those was coming to appreciate the Psalms as the prayers that they are. I'm going to be honest with you, I'm pretty guilty about passing over the Psalms. I'm not one that's good with poetry, and prayers and poetry, don't come naturally to me, and understanding them doesn't come easy to me. But when my professor introduced us to different genres of prayers that existed in the Psalms, it was like my world was open, because in the Psalms we have prayers of praise and we have prayers of adoration and joy, but there's also prayers of lament that individuals pray to God as they express the deepest significance of grief that they experience. And then there's also other prayers. There's what's called imprecatory prayers, which is a really fancy word for prayers of cursing. That we would pray to God, that God would curse someone else. And I'm just here to tell you, as we left and as we went to the hospital, and as Lucy's body was laid on that hospital bed, and as I prayed to God, I will tell you, I prayed nothing good for the man that hit us. I prayed absolutely in that moment that God would kill him. I prayed absolutely in that moment that if God did not kill him, that God would give me the opportunity to kill him. Because God had just taken one of the most precious things away from me. And in that moment, that is the only emotion that I could experience. I think you remember that. I think
that lasted for you a long time, too,
yeah.
After. I think you struggled with anger more so than I did.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't have the language for it at the time to know that it was okay for me to do that. I wasn't thinking about what my Old Testament professor had taught me in seminary, but as I began to process that anger that I had, that very visceral anger, I was reminded of that class. And I was reminded that people of faith prayed prayers like that to God before. Not only did people pray prayers like that to God before, but those prayers were so holy that they were included in our Holy Scripture. So, if people in the past who are lifted up to such a degree that their faithfulness can be honored, even in their anger, I think God could handle whatever it is that I had to say. I think God could deal with that. And it was very, very liberating for me, because there was a lot of anger in that time. There was just a lot. There was a lot of anger.
We're going to talk about our time at the hospital.
Yeah, our time at the hospital was really challenging, and it was really frustrating. That whole week was gut wrenching for us. We have always been. This is something that caused a lot of anger for me. We have always been strong proponents of organ donation, and still are, I think.
I am.
Yeah, I think. But I will tell you that the notion of organ donation in the United States is incredibly romanticized. People just assume it's an easy process, that it's an easy decision, that it doesn't take a lot of time. But when you have lost someone and you just want to move on to the next step, you just want to bury them, you want to mourn, you want to grieve, you want to have the funeral, if you're selecting organ donation, you have to be prepared for that to be that time period to be extended. We were just ready, I think, to get home, to be in our own beds. We were tired. We left RMC. We had to discharge ourselves because we couldn't get care quickly enough for us. Leann's collarbone was broken. It was separated by an inch. My wrist was broken. Could barely walk, but we needed to get to Lucy. And so, we were tired. We were ready for this thing to be over in as much as it could be. But deciding to do organ donation meant that we were going to have to wait on multiple tests to determine brain death so that they could be absolutely, positively certain, which I'm thankful for, that Lucy was not there. But what it meant was that our grief was spread out over an entire week, or that initial shock and trauma. Every single test, every single neurological test was another death, was another mini death. And you said I was angry for a long time. I was angry about that process for a long, long time. And I was angry because it stole something from me. When I said that the last time I got to hold Lucy was when I got her out of the car, part of the reason why that was the last time I got to hold Lucy was because we selected organ donation. And we couldn't touch her. We couldn't really touch her. We couldn't really embrace her. We couldn't really hold her. And while I'm so thankful for the lives that she saved and how she lives on, I was angry for a long time because it stole those moments from me.
Where Kyle experienced a lot of anger that I think later led to depression, and we'll talk more about that later too. But I feel like through all of that, my lamenting and grief, it was delayed in a sense or stifled because I could, in words of Kate Bowler, like Kyle was coming apart he was unspooling, and rightfully so. He had no reason not to. But I feel like I had to keep a lot of it in because I had to keep a lot of it together. I was very aware of the choices that we were making and the decisions and how we responded, how it was going to affect Ashley. I'm still I'll harp on it my whole life, but I'm very protective of him and because of the trauma that he went through, and but I feel like I had to hold it all together, and I think it didn't cause resentment in any way, but it was different. One thing we learned very early on is that we could not share our grief with each other. Kyle and I were both grieving, and which is hard because he's my person. And so the fact that I couldn't share my grief with him and he couldn't share his grief with me because we couldn't burden each other anymore. We had
enough.
We had enough. He had his own grief that he had to deal with, and I had my own grief that I had to deal with, and we were weighted. We couldn't hold any more. And I think I noticed throughout our grieving process there were people who knew that too, who got that. One of those people was my mom. she never, I know she cried, but she always, when I was with her, she stifled her grief so that I could grieve. She knew that I needed to grieve the most, and so she held it together in all of those moments. Because she knew that I couldn't hold it. I couldn't hold her grief because mine was already so much. And so I think our lamentations.
It's a fancy word, lament.
Help me. They were different. Kyle was angry, and I don't really know what I was, but I know I was sad, but I was burdened, and I couldn't hold anything else. And I think we had to learn that through all of this.
And so, I think our reflection is simply that we invite you to ponder is, does that understanding of God, that we invite you to consider in your first reflection, does that allow for you to express the full range of emotion to God? Is God big enough? Is the God that you have, is it God big enough to take the anger and the lament and not just the praise and the worship? Because I think when we look at Scripture, the God that we serve is big enough to take it all. I think that's an important thing to think about. Do you have anything you would add to that? We chose this passage from Romans because Paul is encouraging this early Christian community. And he's encouraging this early Christian community to bear one another's burdens, to use another translation. And because they were dealing with persecution and they were dealing with adversity and they were trying to navigate all of that. And so it just made sense to us because that was what people did for us. Leann talked about we couldn't bear each other's burdens, but there were people who bore burdens for us.
And so we have this big long list, and but people went out of their ways to. People did odd things for us, but it all meant so much to us. And I think one of the very first acts of love that we received from others when we left the hospital that night. So our phone, everything we owned, or not everything we owned, but everything you carry with you on your person was in the car. And so we had no cell phones for days. We didn't have our wallets. We didn't have anything. So that night at the scene, when the one phone number that we knew was my mom's, tried to be better, and Kyle's, but here's what that doesn't do any good. I think we tried to be better about memorizing phone numbers. But one thing that was just amazing is how many people showed up on that night of our accident. And I feel like the time was, I don't know what time our accident was, and I don't know what time we left RMC. I have no idea. But people were there already. It's like the one phone call led to so many, and I know all of Kyle's colleagues were there outside the hospital. You've got to remember it was 2020, so it was COVID. So you couldn't have people in there with you. So everyone was still in masks. It was still, we were still in the thick of COVID. The sanctuary hadn't been opened in months. But people were there at the hospital. I know all of Kyle's colleagues from work were there. I had friends there, dear friends that were there. I remember when we left RMC being buckled in by, I think my friend Keena and Tasha, and I just remember them buckling me in, and Holly drove us to the hospital, and just people were just there, and there instantly, their presence. And a lot of them didn't leave for days.
Yeah, there was just an outpouring of love. And I think one of the most important things for us today, is we talk about Christian love, right? And that word is agape. But in so many different ways, we experience that self-sacrificial love. that required people to give of themselves. I mean, like you mentioned, we were in COVID. I mean, people put themselves at great personal risk to be present with us in the worst moment of our life. They showed up outside the hospital. You gathered here to pray. Like, you did all kinds of things. I mean, when we had her funeral, I mean, how many people in this particular time period had to delay that? But we were blessed to be at this church that had an outdoor chapel that we were able to be at. But even still, right? I mean, even still, you showed up and you put yourself at great personal risk to be with us and to celebrate Lucy's life. And I mean, I think that's what the Apostle Paul is talking about in Romans, bearing one another's burdens. I mean, loving one another, caring for one another, being generous, being gracious. We certainly experienced that. I'll never forget, like, one of the first things, I don't even know if he knows how, like, meaningful this was to us, but Kendall Poole reached out and asked us if we needed anything. And we said, well, we don't have any.
No, that's
no,
not
is
how
that
it
not
went.
how it happened? Okay.
No, we were at, I don't know. There's so much you have to do after someone dies, like stuff. And I remember being at the credit union, and I feel like we were looking for something, and we didn't have it because everything was in the car, and we didn't have wallets. And then the next day, or just hours
Tell the
later,
story. You remember it better than me.
sorry, hours later, Kendall brings us wallets, like nice wallets. And he just knew, like, that was just something small and tangible that he knew we needed. And that's not anything we would have ever asked for, but it was just a small, it was like we were just seen. That small little thing made us feel seen and made us feel loved. And it was so important. Our funeral was, Lucy's funeral was one of the most beautiful things I've ever experienced. And so many people made that possible. Emily decorated for the funeral. She came and got pictures, and she bought picture frames and made sure that it was beautiful. I think Jason did artwork for us. He later made her urn that is just gorgeous. But the Boxes, who are here today, we invited them to come, they went above and beyond. So one thing that people don't necessarily know, I don't know that we've shared, but for some miraculous reason, we had life insurance on both of the kids. And so we actually had a life insurance policy when Lucy died. And you have to take that stuff with you to the funeral home and all of those things. And I knew we wanted to use Anniston Memorial Funeral Home because I had worked with Holly Box through the school system before she retired and went to do that full time. But I knew that that's where we wanted to go. And we took all of our paperwork with us when we first met with them. And they knew we had life insurance, but that didn't matter. The entire funeral was paid. Everything that could be paid for was paid for. I think we had to pay for like an article in the Gadsden Times. That was it. And that meant so much because they knew that there was money. They knew that we had the money to pay for that funeral, but they didn't. They just went above and beyond to make it special. Holly went and looked for a dress for Lucy to wear and just went above and beyond to make that the most, one of the hardest days of your life, but also like really special and really important, and just went above and beyond.
Yeah.
Can you talk about selling our house or whatever?
No, I mean, people just showed up, and I mean, I think that's how God responds. I mean, people pray prayers, and they ask God to do things, but God works through us. That I firmly believe that God rarely. Miracles are by definition rare. That is part of the definition of a miracle. And so more often than not, God doesn't miraculously intervene in our world. God uses God's people to provide healing and help and care and comfort. That's how God works. And so, I was just thankful that there were so many people around us, our best friends, Holly and Matt and Casey and others who were receptive to God's Spirit in their lives, who were in tune enough to what God was calling them to do, to be there. It's so incredibly important because, sometimes if we don't respond to the tugging of our hearts by God's Spirit, sometimes those things just don't get done. That
I don't
that
even
other people
know
need.
how many days Holly took off work. We ended up living with, so our house was for sale. The realtor, she became a very dear friend to us, and she knew, like, immediately took the signs off of our yard, took the lockbox off the door, and knew this is not the time to sell the house. But we had decided very shortly after that, no, it is the time. Now, more so than ever, is definitely the time to sell this house. And so we ended up living with Casey for, I think it was supposed to be 2 weeks, and then turned into a month because we had to find somewhere else to live. And she graciously and welcomed us in. Holly took off a zillion days from work. I don't even know how many days she took off from work. She knew I needed her. One day she held my hand when I went to sleep at night because I just couldn't sleep. She just it was the little things. I don't, just being there and being present. When we did sell our house, many of you came and packed up all of our belongings, and Kyle, we'll talk about this in the next lesson, but ended up having a mental health crisis through all of that, and I was left by myself. And a lot of you came and you packed up the boxes, you packed up Lucy's room, you got us ready to move, and you just showed up.
And so our invitation, I guess, is, how can you show up for other people in the midst of crisis? Because my experience has been, if you just ask someone, what do you need? They're just either going to say prayer, which is helpful, or they're going to say, I'm good, thanks. And so taking the time to think about someone else when they're in the midst of trauma or crisis or adversity or whatever, and, just show up with what they need.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be anything big. And sometimes it's just showing up and saying nothing. That sometimes was somebody just to sit with you in a quiet room.
Yeah, saying nothing and saying I love you are two of the most important things. Not trying to problem solve, not trying to explain why things are happening. There is power in presence, I think.
I definitely think we learned that.
So my undergraduate degree is in religious studies, which a lot of people think just means Christian theology. It's not what it means. It means I studied a lot of different religions while I was in undergraduate, and so I became familiar with different traditions. And one of the traditions that I became familiar with was Buddhism. And there is this understanding in Buddhism that our world is kind of plagued with suffering, and that in order to experience rebirth in Buddhism, you have to escape that cycle of suffering. And when you escape that cycle of suffering, you're reborn, or you're kind of resurrected. And for me, that became very much a theme as I processed all that had happened to us, because there was so much suffering that we went through, and so much suffering that we grieved through, and so I just came to appreciate not like Buddhist resurrection, but I became to appreciate Christian resurrection, as an outcome of our experience, that God was doing something new in the midst of this tragedy that we had experienced, that the suffering was not useless. It's not to say that God planned that, but that it wasn't useless, that God could somehow redeem that suffering, and that God could somehow redeem us in the midst of it. And so there were so many different ways that we experienced little resurrections, right? We think about Jesus being resurrected, but resurrection happens for us too, as individuals. It happens to communities of faith. It happens in different ways where we experience God's redemption, and we're born again, to use the the scripture from John that used that language from John. And in some ways, literally, I think, for us,
Yes.
there was a death that happened. There was literally Lucy's death, but really there was a death of us as well, like
Of our family,
of our family.
our life as we knew it
Like,
was over.
yeah, I mean, like when we talk about ourselves, we're not the same people that we used to be, and we're just not. In some ways, we're very, very different people. We think kind of different thoughts. It's like you talk to us sometimes, and we may say, well, it's like we've lived two different lives.
Yes.
Like it literally feels like two different lives. There is a life before Lucy died, and then there's a life after Lucy died, and they're different. They're marked by different vocations in some ways. I mean, I don't know that I would have ever left the church to work at United Way and to work on homelessness if this hadn't happened, for lots of various reasons.
And that was very good for you. I think Kyle needed to step back from the church for a while. I don't know how.
Go.
Working for the church like angered you for a long time. I think after Lucy died, like everything seemed so, I don't know. It's like we just saw the world through a different lens because our life was so broken. And it's like, why are we upset about something that seems so simple?
Yeah.
And so Kyle would be angered by that for a long time. But when he changed jobs and went to work for United Way, it like brought this new life back into him, and he could like let go of some of the anger he had with the church. And I think, and then of course brought him back here.
Well, I think it's like you're struggling with perspective, right? I mean, like you've just lost your 3-year-old, right? And then somebody asked you to do a funeral for somebody that's 98 years old, and they're incredibly devastated, and rightfully so, but you don't have the bandwidth to be upset about somebody that lived a long and full life, right? And so there was no way that I was going to be able to provide the pastoral care for people that I needed to provide in those situations, because everything was out of whack and out of sync, and there was just no way to do it. I mean, I tried to. I mean, part of my mental health crisis was trying to come back to work entirely too soon. I mean, it was a month after Lucy died, and I was back at work. And while there are helpful voices like that were there with us, there were also some unhelpful ones that were there. And they were with good intentions. But one of the voices was, you need to get back to work, because if you can get back to work and you can get back to routine and you can get back to normalcy, things will be better. Things will be better, but.
And you listened to that, and I did not. I stayed out of work for a long time. I was out for a whole semester, and I felt very supported to do that. I felt very supported in taking off for the semester.
Well, in my situation, it wasn't even anybody at the church, too, that was telling me you need to get back to work. It was somebody that wasn't even here. That was their helpful, unsolicited advice.
That you, for some reason, listened to.
For some reason.
I think that for me, Kyle's major resurrection was him changing jobs and being able to like let go of some of that anger. But my resurrections happened in a different way. Writing was very meaningful to me and helped me. I would think things in my head, and they would stay in my head until I could get them out. And when I could write and get those things out, I felt I could be at peace. Like I could put that little part of my grief behind me. And so writing was a way of giving me resurrection. Having another baby was a way that gave me resurrection. Kyle, it's no surprise, Kyle did not necessarily want to have any more
kids. It is by the
kids.
Grace of God that Meredith is here today.
Yes. But he did, and he agreed to it because he knew that I needed it. I needed Meredith because
I did too, but
you
I didn't
did
know
too.
that.
He didn't want to admit it though. And that pregnancy was so hard because there were just so many emotions. But her life gave us a resurrection that we needed, that we didn't even realize that we needed. And then there are like little small resurrections that I feel still happen now that like just give me a renewed, I don't know, outlook and a new a peace. I don't know. When people remember Lucy and go out of their way to remember Lucy and just do something that reminds me like her life had meaning and she was important. There was one year on Lucy's birthday that Tammy's husband Joseph, he would probably be so mad if I told you this, but it was his idea to put butterflies all in our yard one year on her birthday. And so we came home to our yard like butterflied, like just a million little butterflies. And it was it just brought a little piece of joy that somebody else remembered her and went out of their way to remember her. On Lucy's first birthday after she died, Kayla threw a birthday party for her at TCP. Didn't ask us about it, didn't tell us about it, but when she did that and they celebrated, her classmates celebrated, and they celebrated her at her pre-K graduation that she didn't get to attend. Those little things just bring resurrection. I have a friend that every year remembers the anniversary of her death, and I don't even talk to this friend very often, but she sends me a text every year on that day, and it's just the little things. It's like when people remember and go out of their way to remember her and the life that she lived, even though it was very brief. And at this point, there's been more time past her death than there was in her life. When people go out of their way to remember that, it brings me just this resurrection and like just this peace that I can keep going. I can find joy in this life that I have now.
And so just kind of the last reflection is, how do you choose resurrection in your faith? Because I think it's really easy to either be complacent or just kind of stay where you are. But I think God calls us to something different. God calls us to be born again, to be renewed. I think that's the message of the good news of the gospel, that we can be transformed. And I would just invite you to consider that this morning. We're all different. We all have different things that we're working through and struggling with. And, maybe it's grief, but maybe it's some sort of other kind of adversity that you're dealing with or challenges. And just, how is God inviting you to experience resurrection? That would be our question for you this morning.